Hey everyone, welcome back to Funeral Industry Insights, the show where we share snippets of our industry to help and assist families. I'm your host, Michelle Dwyer, and today we're going to be busting open some of the most common myths floating around the funeral industry right here in Australia. Now, you might be surprised how many things that people think they know about funerals, coffins, cremations. They're actually outdated, misunderstood, or simply just plain wrong. So whether you're curious, planning ahead, or you just love a good myth-busting session, stick around. Okay, let's start with the big one. You have to use a funeral director. Now, as the owner of Dwyer Family Funerals, you'd think I probably wouldn't discuss this one with you, but you should be armed with all the information. So I may actually cop some ridicule within the industry for discussing this, but anyway, here goes. Most Australians assume that when someone dies, right, that you have to use a funeral director. However, the truth is you don't. There's actually no legal requirement that states that you need to use a funeral director, but they do offer comfort, support, and advice during the funeral planning process. And the funeral directors will generally provide the service of bringing your loved one into their care, lodging the legal documentation, and organising the funeral service if there is going to be one held. In every state and territory, it is actually legal for families to handle this part and the funeral arrangements themselves, though please know it's actually not for the faint of heart, and there are still some logistical and legal hoops that you will need to jump through. While you can arrange for a funeral without a funeral director, the burial or the cremation requires specific process where you still may need to involve a funeral director or a relevant health authority as well. So, but just know that not all funeral directors are the same. So remember that most are helpful and have your best interests at heart, but you just need to know that it actually isn't a legal requirement. It's just the most common path people take. And to be honest, it is the most preferred. Okay, the next one. Now, this one's interesting, that you have to be buried or cremated in a coffin. Now, in Australia, you don't necessarily need to be buried in a traditional coffin. Okay, so in most states, you're allowed to use a coffin, a casket, or even an eco-friendly shroud, though the cemetery may have their own requirements, okay? So that's where you may hit a bit of a loophole. But if you've been dreaming of a biodegradable pod or a shroud burial, that's increasingly possible, because especially we're seeing the rise of green funerals across the country as well. But the New South Wales Public Health Regulation 2022 does require that all cremations, including like your direct cremations, has to use a coffin, okay? However, they can be cardboard, particle board, or even wicker. Okay, our third myth today is that bodies are always embalmed. Now, contrary to what TV dramas and Hollywood might have you believe, embalming is actually not required by law in most cases in Australia. Now, I say most cases because it is mandatory for all above ground burials. So that's like your vaults, crypts, mausoleums. It's also mandatory if the body is going to be repatriated interstate or overseas. And also, if there's going to be a significant delay between when someone passes away and when the funeral is going to be held, then definitely embalming will need to take place. So if you wish to have a family viewing, it doesn't mean that your body needs to be embalmed. However, a temporary embalm can be chosen for cosmetic reasons. It also makes the body more presentable sometimes too. So this is where your mortuary, like your mortician at the funeral home, will guide the funeral director and yourselves sort of better. But if you don't want embalming, then you can definitely request that doesn't happen. However, just be aware that it may limit some of the timing options for when your funeral service needs to take place. Okay, here's one that hits the wallet, that funerals are always expensive. So quite often I'll ask families what their expectations are around price. So to hear that a lot of people are expecting $15,000 or more absolutely shocks me, okay? It's not a myth though. It is myth, sorry, though not without some truth, okay? So, yes, traditional funerals can be expensive, but there are affordable alternatives, okay? So you've got your direct cremations where there's no service help, okay? So it definitely pays to shop around though, as there are a lot of big businesses in the industry, okay? Now, where $15,000 is okay, that's probably where they're sitting, okay? But having worked for them in the past, there are a lot of add-ons. So whereas an independent, say, family-run funeral home will generally include a lot of those. So in my personal opinion, obviously I'm an independent funeral operator. So for me, I know that with us at Dwyer Family Funerals, we're always open to trying to help reduce costs for families. So for me, yeah, I just think that independent offers a little bit more sort of flexibility. However, but look, just also know that some states will even allow for natural or bushland burials, and that can cut down on costs and also the environmental impact as well. So, okay, myth number 5. All funeral services have to be held in a church or crematorium chapel. Now, this is definitely not true, okay? So funerals can be held almost anywhere in Australia, provided that we get the right permissions. So parks, beaches, backyards, everything's possible, like sports clubs, the hall, auditoriums, as long as we get permission from obviously either the landholder or, the venue holder, etc., then that's fine. You don't have to hold the service in a church or at the crematorium's chapel. It just means that once the service has concluded, that your family member will need to be transported to either the cemetery or the crematorium. Okay, so the key here is making the service personal, so not following a rigid template. Okay, so in saying that as well, like celebrants and the clergy, like priests, ministers, they do lead most ceremonies. However, it can be entirely family-led, or sometimes the funeral director will just guide as well. So again, options on reducing prices and things like that too. Okay, our next myth is about prepaid funerals and that they're always a good deal. Now, look, prepaid funerals are smart. You lock in at today's price and you save the family stress later, okay? But just be careful is more what I want to say in this sort of part. There are risks, especially if you move interstate or the funeral home for some reason goes bust. Look, here, like with us, we do funeral bonds or, some people do choose funeral insurance. That offers a little bit more flexibility, but it protects your money, okay? So if you're going to do anything to do with prepaid funerals, always read the fine print and ideally get independent financial advice before you sign anything, okay? But definitely be looking into funeral bonds over sort of, leaving your money actually just with the funeral director directly. Okay, our last myth today is that bodies are not cremated individually. Well, as per the New South Wales Public Health Regulations 2022, a person must not cremate more than one body at any one time. Okay, so we are seeing an increase in private crematoriums popping up. So your family member does not have to be cremated at one of the big crematoriums. Okay, so I think sometimes people think, that's my local crematorium, that's where we have to go, we have to use that chapel, blah, blah, blah. It's not the case, okay? So, but I also know that, look, after speaking to some families, that there are some concerns about private crematoriums, but just know that, look, they are regulated exactly the same as the big crematoriums, okay? So the regulations are there, and they are all there for anyone that's operating any of those facilities. Okay, so there you have it. 7 myths hopefully explained to you. As you know, the Australian funeral industry is full of mystery, but the more we talk about it, the more we can make informed, empowered choices, and that's what it's all about. So if you found this episode helpful at all, please make sure you either subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who you know needs to hear the truth. So, but until next time, remember, planning ahead isn't morbid. It's one of the kindest things that you can do. I'm Michelle Dwyer, and I'll catch you next time.